Welcome, everybody. I'm very excited to see friends of ours today on the shiur, and you've come on for a very good shiur. I'd like to welcome Rabbi Abraham Aryeh and Rachel Trugman. Today we're going to be celebrating the month of Kislev and connecting to the great personalities of our dear Imaho, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and trying to understand similarities and the differences between them. And so thank you very much um, to Rabbi and Rebbitzin Trugman, and we're very eager to learn together today.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to our monthly Rosh Chodesh class. We always start with a little singing to give a few more people a chance to come on. I applaud you that you're on time. So we have a song that has to do with Rachel. And this song comes from the prophet Yirmiyahu. And not to bring up a sad occurrence, but if everyone remembers when the three teenagers were kidnapped about 8 to 10 years ago. So this song, people were praying all over Israel. And this song kind of, for those 3 weeks until they found the bodies, unfortunately, this song like spread all over Israel. It's not a new song, but it symbolized everyone's desire that our children should come back. So the words are, Kol Barama, a voice is heard in a place called Ramah. Barama Kol Nishma, in this place, this voice is heard. Rachel Mevacha Al Baneha, Rachel is crying for her children. And the very, very well-known refrain is Vishavu Banim Ligvulam, that the children should return to their borders. Kol berama, berama, kol nishma, Rachel mevacha, Rachel mevacha, mevacha al baneha, kol berama, berama, kol nishma, Rachel mevacha, Rachel mevacha, mevacha al baneha, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim ligvulam, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim ligvulam. Kol berama, berama, kol nishma, Rachel mevacha, Rachel mevacha, mevacha al baneha, Kol berama, berama, kol nishma, Rachel mevacha, Rachel mevacha, mevacha al baneha, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim ligvulam, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim, Vishavu banim ligvulam. Okay, today we are going to be looking into the lives of Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, and trying to see some of the similarities, some of the contrasts. And we're going to start with my wife, Rachel.
But I'm not starting with Rachel because I'm going to go in chronological order. And I'm going to talk first about Rivka. Now, Rivka Imenu, it's interesting that the root of her name comes from the verb to tie together, like as if you're tying together two animals to be able to pull a plow. So that's the kind of tying that is the root of her name, Rabak, Rivka. And it's interesting because she is soulmates with Yitzchak Avinu from the day of creation. And it's even proven in the day that can you show me the machzor? And if you see the highlighted letters here, you'll see that Yitzchak and Rivka, you see the Yud, there it is, and Rivka are in the actual highlighted letters in Nusach Sfard of the prayer that is the main focal prayer of Rosh Hashanah, which is the day of creation. It starts with Hamelech and then Yitzchak, Rivka. And to see that they were soulmates already from the roots of their name, and that Yitzchak's test was the test of the Akedah. Akkad, Ayin Kuf Dalid, is another root for tying up. And it's actually interesting that when you see a man after his tefillin have come off, you can see the lines on his arm as he has been tied down and tied up to Shemayim and tied down from his lower desires. And that's part of the process of putting on tefillin, and the marks remain on the arm afterwards. So that's tying down and being connected to Shemayim is part of what's going on with both Yitzchak and with Rivka in their personal tests. So Rivka's first test came about when she was only 3 years old, according to the Midrash, when Eliezer, this giant of a man, some say according to the Midrash that he was 20 amas high, which is like very, very tall. Beyond that, if a sukkah is taller than 20 amas, it's no longer kosher because your eye can't even glance there so easily. And so he was a giant of a man. If you look at the gematria, the numerical value of the name Eliezer, it equals 318. And it talks about how when Avram went out to fight the battles of the 4 and 5 kings, Eliezer was his one companion, and he was equal to 318 people. So this giant of a man is approaching a little girl as she's shepherding her flock for her father. Now, what little 3-year-old girl goes out to shepherd with the flock? What kind of a home is this that Rivka is coming from? She's coming from a very abusive place and from a place of idol worship. And so she knows firsthand the difference between good and evil. And when she sees this giant approaching her, she understands, like she has to think on her feet. She has to be very quick and very clever and to think about how she's going to approach this stranger who's coming to her, who's so enormous and so beyond normal. And she manages to come up with a solution. Now she's thinking to herself, this huge guy, can't he draw his own water? Why is he approaching a little girl for water? Must be something wrong here. And so she immediately thinks to water the camels. And she pours out her water from her jar. And she's able to therefore avoid any contagion. Now, with the COVID around us all the time and being concerned about contagion, we can imagine what she was thinking at that time. And so she avoids the contagion of direct contact with him by indirectly stepping the camels in between. Now, Rivka rode out with him, and she agreed to go with him, even though she didn't know anything about who this 37-year-old man was that she was going to be betrothed to, because she understood the difference between the good and the evil. And as she's riding on this camel, she takes the initiative. She's a very active personality, and all of her lifespan, you could see it over and over again, how she's not passive compared to Yitzchak, who is, much more quiet, reserved, inward, perhaps because of his blindness, perhaps because of his tmimut, and Ishtam Yoshebo Alim is Yaakov, his descendant. But as she's riding out on this camel, the camel is the symbol of endurance. A camel can walk through the desert on one good gulp of water for about a month. It's amazing how it can store in its fatty back hump. It can store enough of its energy to be able to endure. And this is part of Rivka's quality also, that she's able to endure a lot of different trials. So as she's riding out on this camel, she perceives that they're passing past a mountain. And we're talking about, what mountain is this? This is actually Mount Moriah. And who is out there on this mountain? It's actually Yitzchak. V'yetze Yitzchak lasuach basadeh. And she observes something unique about him, the way that he is standing there at the sunset, which is her favorite time of day. The colors are beautiful and the sky is all illuminated, and there's a drama and a beauty that's unequaled. And she's watching this man, and she sees him take 3 steps backward and 3 steps forward, and then he bows. And she realizes that this person is connected to heaven, and he's connected on this place that's called a sadeh. And so she understands that this must be her soulmate. This is the person that she must be connected to, because she has this innate connection also, despite the triple layer of her coming from Padan Aram, from the Beit Lavan, from this place of idol worship, from her brother of Lavan and Bat Betuel, that she's coming from this triple layer of impurity. She still has inside of her this Pintel Yid, this pure place that was able to resonate with this man who was actually going to daven the very first mincha prayer that was recorded in Tanach. And he's stepping backward and he's stepping forward. And she understands that this is him. And the Sadeh is going to come back later, as we see. We will see. So when she comes to her mother-in-law's tent, she never met her mother-in-law, because her mother-in-law died on the day of the Akedah, the day that she was born, that similar root name to her root name, Rabak and Akkad. And she comes into the tent and she sees that the things that were missing during these 37 years while she was, Yitzhak was mourning for his mother. So she's coming to the 3 years that she was mourning for her, Yitzhak was mourning for his mother. They were restored into her tent. The first thing was the candles, that the candle that used to be lit from one Shabbat to the next Shabbat suddenly lit up again as Rivka entered this tent. And then the blessing in the dough, that every time that she would bake, there would be plenty, more than enough for anyone who would want to come and join them for their feast. There was always enough food. And then the third thing was, of course, the observance of Nida. We talked about this last month. The acronym Chana or Hachen are the 3 women's primary mitzvot. The Hadlaka is the Hey, the Nida is the Nun, and the Chala is the Chala, which is like an overview of all of Kashrut that is in the hands of the woman who takes in things from the Sadeh, from the external world, and brings it into the Pnimiyut, into the inner world. So when she's in the tent, she notices that these things are being restored, and Yitzchak finds comfort with her for the loss of his mother, of Sarah. And then after years of marriage, now remember they were married when she was only 3 years old, according to Rashi. This was like when a child is possible to have intercourse. But only after 10 years did they begin to pray that she could have a child. And when she was 13 years old, they began to pray. They prayed for another 10 years until she was 23 years old. And they stood on the roof and they prayed. And so we learned a very interesting principle from a story from the Masechet Ta'anit about Abba Shaul and his wife, who went to pray on the roof at the time of a drought. And they were standing on the roof, and the clouds gathered over his wife and not over him. And so it's interesting like that. Why did the clouds gather? He was the descendant, the Nechad, the You can see his gravesite actually in Chatzor, north of Tzfat. If you travel to the north, he's buried next to his grandfather, Honi Amagel. His specialty was praying for rain during droughts and bringing incredible, miraculous blessings of rain coming down. And so they approached Abba Shaul to pray also. But so everyone, all of his Talmidim, his students of Abba Shaul asked him, like, why did the clouds gather over your wife's head? And he said, this is what was happening. It said, it says the Ikar Hamaaseh, the main thing is the deed. When I would give charity to someone, I would give a coin, and they would have to go and redeem this coin and collect its value and then purchase food and then cook the food. But when people would come to my house and my wife would give them charity, she would feed them. She would give them immediate sustenance, immediate strength. And so the blessings, the clouds formed over her head because Ikar Maseh, the main thing is the deed. And we see this thread going through from Rivka Imenu. The main thing is the deed. She actually drew the water for all these camels, which is they can drink an enormous amount. They have to drink up for a whole month. And so they were wondering about why the clouds gathered over Yitzchak's head when they both were praying on the roof to have children after this many years of childlessness. And so they said that Ein Domei Tfilah Shel Tzadik Ben Tzadik LeTzadik Ben Rasha. Yitzchak being the child of a tzaddik, of Abraham, so the clouds gathered over his head first. And Rivka, in order to penetrate all the layers of Tumah that she came out of, it was an amazing process that had to happen. And Rivka, according to Rabbi Steinsaltz in his book called Biblical Images, called her the white sheep of the family. We know about the black sheep, but she was the unique one among all the families that of Tumah and idol worship that she came from, and incest. And she was able to rise above all of that. But for the blessings to go up and down from heaven, they had to penetrate through those layers and stop and go, stop and go. But to Yitzhak, it was a direct channel. So he was answered first when they came to pray. Now, another thing about Rivka is that when Rivka was giving over the blessings to Yaakov and helping engineer that Yaakov would get the blessing and not Esav, she knew about Esav's misbehaviors, and she was able to protect Yitzhak because Yitzhak was blind. There were two layers of blindness that happened to Yitzhak. One was the tears of the angels who cried when he was on the altar, and he was about to be slaughtered by his own father, who was Midat Chesed. And even though it was a test, the angels were crying. And so these tears pouring down into the eyes of Yitzhak created into him this kind of a blindness that happened. But also the smoke of all of Esav's wives offering incense to the idol worship that they believed in was also blinding Yitzhak. But Rivka had clear vision, and she was able to engineer it so that this special garment called Bigdei Hamudot, it's in today's Aliyah, if you want to read it, the Aliyah to Torah, when she was the care holder for this very special garment that came down from Adam Arishon. How did Adam subdue all the animals and bring them to him so he could name them? He wore this special garment with the images of all the animals on them. And then there came down through Noach, through Shem, and through Yitzhak. But how did it get to Yitzhak's children? It came through Nimrod. Nimrod was also, unfortunately, into this idol worship and believed that there were some superpowers in the garment itself, and not that Hashem was blessing. But Esav murdered Nimrod, stole this garment, and this is what he used when it says Ish Tzayid, when Esav was a person who was going out into the fields. He went out into the fields and wore this garment, and all the animals came running to him. And the final thing was that when Rivka gave this garment that he kept with safekeeping, Esav kept with safekeeping with his mother because he didn't trust his idol-worshipping wives. So she was able to put this on Yaakov, and Yitzchak was able to smell this, a smell of Reach HaSadeh. What was this smell of the Sadeh? Here's the Sadeh again. V'yetze Yitzchak l'suach b'Sadeh. And it says it even in the text that the Sadeh was Gan Eden, the Reach of Gan Eden, Asher Bercho Hashem. This is the field that God blessed. This is the place of Har Moriah, the place of Gan Eden. And Rivka, when in her last moments, she commanded the Chaver Kadisha who were around her when she was 121 years old and about to die. And Yaakov was too far away to come to escort her. And Asa would be the only one to escort her to her grave. She begged the Chaver Kadisha to please bury her at night because she was so ashamed that she was the mother of Esau, who did all of these wicked deeds. And so that was the full chronology of Rivka's life. Even to the very last moment, she had her very sense of initiative, taking initiative, and having prophetic vision throughout her life.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up, thank you. I'm going to pick up with this idea that Yitzchak's prayer, when they were praying together, that the Torah makes it clear that Yitzchak was answered. And as my wife said, like Rashi explains, is that the prayer of a righteous person, the child of a righteous person, will be answered before a righteous person, the child of a not righteous person. Before I delve into that, though, a beautiful gematria, for those of you who like gematria, is this prayer that Yitzchak and Rivka were praying together for children is very unique. You don't see in, to the best of my knowledge, in the rest of the Tanach, a case where you have husband and wife explicitly davening together. And so the numerical value for prayer, tefillah, which equals 515, equals exactly the two names Yitzchak, Rivka. So Yitzchak and Rivka were connected essentially in their essence to this level of prayer. But to continue with this idea of a righteous one, the child of a righteous one being answered, we have a bit of a contradiction. I mean, that's true. It's true. But we also have the statement that in the place that a Baal Tshuva stands, even a complete tzaddik cannot stand. When we look at the Avot and the Imahot, Avram and Sarah, they come from unrighteous parents. And in a sense, they are not just the first Jews, but they're the first Balei Tshuva. And Rivka also was coming from a place of idol worship. And she took a different path. She chose a different path. So even though for children, Yitzhak was answered, we see very importantly that at the end of this parsha, when it comes to Yitzhak wanting initially to give the blessing to Esav, it's Rivka who intercedes, takes the initiative, and engineers Yaakov getting the blessing. So there's a very deep question here. Why didn't she just go to her husband and discuss the matter and try to convince him that Yaakov deserves the blessing more than Esau? That's not what happened. She pulled a quick one, we'll say, and she engineered this whole complicated story that Yaakov will get the blessing. So we need to go back to when she was pregnant, and the Midrash says, Rashi brings it, that when she would go past a house of idol worship, so she could feel one of the children, but she knew she had twins, was getting all excited. And when she would go past the yeshiva of Shem and Ever, then the other child would get excited. And the Torah says that she was in great distress physically from what was happening here. And she went to, it says, to inquire of God. And Rashi tells us she went to the yeshiva of Shem and Ever. They had prophetic powers. And they told her that you have two nations in your womb, and that the elder will serve the younger. So the question is, it appears from everything we know, she never told Yitzchak this. She understood that one of the sons was not going to turn out so good, and that there would be a struggle between them. But it appears that Yitzchak didn't know this. So the question is, why did she hide this? So this gets to what we were saying before, that a righteous person, the child of an unrighteous person, in a certain way has less merit. So her whole life, she felt somewhat responsible of giving birth to an unrighteous soul like Esav. She, in a sense, had, we'll call it a guilt feeling, that somehow Yaakov must come from Yitzchak and Esav comes from me. And yet, in the end, because of her prophetic powers, just like Sarah had prophetic powers, and we'll see in a few minutes that Rachel and Leah also had prophetic powers, Ruach HaKodesh, she was able to understand that Yaakov was the one who had to get this blessing. So what we see from this is we have a balance here. On a certain level, a tzaddik has a certain level of merit that someone who is, let's say, a Baal Tshuva does not have. And yet we see that in the end, Rivka determined what would happen here, not Yitzchak. Just like Sarah, this is a comparison. Just like Sarah, Avram, who is so much chesed, he actually had a hard time differentiating between Yishmael and Yitzchak. He couldn't see clearly that Yishmael really was, at that point, a bad influence for Yitzchak. Just like Yitzchak could not see clearly that Esav was not such a good influence. And so here we see that Sarah and Rivka both were and the power of their very being, they determined really all of history. All of history follows what Sarah did by making this differentiation between Yishmael and Yitzchak. It was painful. In fact, we're still, in a sense, feeling the reverberations of that separation. But the separation had to be made. And so we see the same thing with Rivka. Yitzchak was about to give the blessing to Esav, and we're told that this blessing was and is incredibly powerful. And so if Esav would have gotten this blessing, in a sense, the whole balance of reality would have changed. So here we see a very, very strong connection between Sarah and Rivka. And as Rachel said, that when Rivka comes into the tent of Sarah, in a sense, all of the special qualities of Sarah come back. And Yitzchak sees that immediately. Okay, in the limited time that we have, we're now going to move on to Rachel and Leah and see further comparisons. But before we do that, I want to point out that there's a very deep connection between Yitzchak and Rivka and Yaakov and Rachel. And what is it? In both of these cases, it's what we commonly call love at first sight, which is really the exception more than the rule. That usually a relationship develops, and that's good and that's natural. But there are occasions where a man meets a woman, and within a very short time, it becomes absolutely clear that they're soulmates. I'm saying this because that's what happened to us. We're I guess the exception for the rule is that within, really it was 48 hours, we were already talking about getting married. It was just so clear to us. So we're taught that there are actually 5 couples in the Tanach. I'm not saying these are the only ones, but their story is described in the Tanakh, and there are 5 stories of love at first sight. The first one, and I'm doing this very quickly, is Adam and Chava. Because Adam, when Chava is taken from him, from his side, he said, this time, this is the bone of my bone, the etzem of my etzem. And he recognized immediate essence of essence. He immediately recognized that this was his soulmate.
1 minute. Can I ask a question?
As long as it doesn't take us off the subject, because after
No. It's Adam and Chava, but they had no other people, so it's not a big deal that he wanted to marry her.
No, I didn't say. I said love at first sight. There's a very big difference whether they would have developed a relationship. Maybe he wouldn't have liked her. Maybe they wouldn't have gotten together. It's not guaranteed. Anyway, it's a good question. But we're talking about the quality here because of what he said. He said this time, because according to the Midrash, however we understand this, he was together with all of the animals. Until Chava came along. The second case is Yitzchak and Rivka. That when she saw him for the first time, it says she literally fell off the camel. She just whoa. And we're told that this was also a case of love at first sight. Next week's parsha is when Yaakov meets Rachel.
Hello.
The first thing he does is...
Hello.
Yes?
Leah? Hello, Leah?
Someone should be muted.
Someone should mute here. That when Yaakov meets Rachel, the first thing he does is he goes up to her and kisses her. And then he cries. And we're told that this is the classic case of love at first sight. And then twice in the life of David HaMelech, when he first meets Abigail, and unfortunately because of limited time, we can't go into all these stories. But in the book of Shmuel, when he meets Abigail, he immediately falls in love with her. And of course, the famous story of Bathsheba. So I'm just mentioning that in passing. And now I'm going to turn it back to my wife, and she's going to introduce us to, I believe, mostly Rachel.
Right.
And then I will take it from there.
So my namesake, it's one of the highlights about her was that she says in the Gemara, it says, Rachel tafsa b'shtika, lachen zachta she'avanei yishpe yiyu shel banei haBinyamin. So Rachel grabbed onto this aspect of quietness, of silence. She held onto it with both hands. Now, it must have been a huge test for her not to turn in her sister and not to stop the proceedings at the wedding, because she knew that Leah was going to be put in first, and that this whole drama was going to happen, that Leah would approach the wedding, and she could have called the whole thing off. by saying, no, it's not me, it's Leah. But she didn't. She was silent. She didn't want to humiliate her sister. And she had a very deeper inner sense of herself so that she could go into that inner place, that panimi place, and hold on with two hands to the silence. So it says, I did a little picture based on the midrash that I learned about Rachel being the silent one. You could see that she's crying. She's heartbroken. This is her soulmate. She knows that Yaakov is her soulmate. And yet she is able to silence herself and not interrupt the proceedings and allow Leah to stand under the chuppah with Yaakov. So Yashpe, the Yashpe comes from the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol. Each of the tribes received one precious gem that was representative of that tribe. And the tribe of Binyamin received the son of Rachel, received the Yashpe, because he also tafas b'shtika, he also held on with two hands to this aspect of silence, that he never revealed to his father about the plot of his brothers against Yosef that resulted in Yosef being sold as a slave, and the years of torture that he experienced, and the separation, 17 years of separation from his father. He never turned his brothers in. He kept the silence.
Where does it say that he knew of it?
He was alive at that time. Binyamin was born. He was a child.
But if they plotted away.
Yosef was 17 years old when he was sold to Egypt, correct? Yosef was 17 years old.
Okay.
He didn't have a beard yet even, so the brothers didn't recognize him when they were reunited, and he was a full-grown man with a beard. They just didn't recognize him. But Binyamin was at home with Binyamin was at home. He heard the brothers talking.
No, they didn't. They didn't tell him. He didn't know.
He didn't, but Binyamin, this is according to the Midrash. Binyamin knew, but he didn't give it away. And he didn't give it away after the brothers were reunited. There was all those 17 years that they lived together in Mitzrayim. After the famine and the family was reunited, and Yitzchak Yaakov went down to Egypt with the tribes, and they were reunited with Yosef. During that entire time, Yosef was never alone with his father, so that he would have to tell his father and reveal to his father. And Binyamin also knew about this, but did not reveal it. So this is the whole thing. This is the whole line of the Midrash that I'm taking here. And then, so the Midrash says that just like Rachel kept silence, so did her son Binyamin keep silence. And now there's another generation that comes later, and that's Esther. Esther and lo mageret ama. Esther didn't tell Achashverosh that she was a Jewess until it came down to the wire. Then when the waters came up to be drowning the Jewish people, and it was going to be the end, and Haman was going to have his way, only then did she reveal the plot of Haman against her people, and that she was associated with these same people. Only then did she reveal it. She was able to hold on to this midah that she came through the generations, from Rachel, through Binyamin, because Esther was related to Mordechai, Ish Yemini. He was a child of the tribe of Binyamin. And so she was able to also hold on to that quality of silence. And my mother, Leah Shalom, used to tell me, when you want something from your father, don't grab him the first minute that he walks in from work. Let him come in, have a nice meal. Does this resonate? Rivka sends Yaakov out to get some nice food, and she cooks up some food before she wants to ask something from Yitzchak. And so also, my mother's Chochmat Nashim Banta Beita, the wisdom of a woman, builds her home. And so she was able to be silent, wait till he comes in, has a nice meal, relax, then you ask him for something. So that was invoking my mother, Fega Bat Nachman David Alea Shalom.
Okay, is that it?
That's what I
have
heard.
Okay, so
the Yashpe, just Yashpe, Yeshpe. There is a mouth, but she didn't use it. She kept her silent.
Yashpe is the Hebrew word for that stone?
For the stone of the tribe of Benjamin.
Yashpe.
Set Yashpe. Ye, which is made up of two words, Yesh Pe. There is a mouth. But knowing when to use it. It's great wisdom.
Rachel
Okay.
confronts Yaakov about not having children. But she said, if you don't give me children, I'll die.
Right. Right.
Well-
And some say that she was cursed because of that.
Well, that's
Let's
what
keep quiet.
Yes.
that's what Shlomo Melech in Kohelet. There's a time to speak,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a time to be silent.
Mm.
This is a great wisdom. Many people mostly are silent. Most people mostly are talking. The wisdom, I mean, we're confronted every day with with tests of when we should say something and when we should not say something.
Mm.
So Rachel at different times, she had a mouth, and other times she at the critical time when she could have really embarrassed her sister, she was silent. So we're going to continue now. And since we mentioned we're trying to do comparisons and differences. So before we get deeply into the differences between Rachel and Leah, we want to compare them to Sarah and Rivka, who we mentioned already had very strong prophetic powers. I didn't mention that with the whole incident with Yishmael, and Avram was very reluctant, God himself had to come to Avram and say, everything that your wife is telling you, you need to do. And Rashi explains that on a certain level, Sarah had a greater state of prophecy than even Abraham. And we see with Rivka also that her vision was clear. So where do we see with Rachel and Leah that they also had prophetic powers? They had Ruach HaKodesh. We don't see it explicitly, but where we do see it is in the phenomenon that Rachel and Leah are naming all of their children. Yaakov isn't naming them. All of the children are given their names by Rachel and Leah. And from this, we learn the idea that when we name our children, there's a little bit of Ruach HaKodesh there, because when a child is born and we have to name them, so, and sometimes for months before, you'll have the husband and the wife thinking of names, and we're told that at a certain point, there's a little bit of Ruach HaKodesh that comes through in order to name the children according to like who they really are. But the interesting thing is when you see the explanations in the Torah, it seems that the children are being named by energy that is happening right at that moment, especially like how Leah is feeling. She's naming each child according to how she feels at the time. So it doesn't appear that how is she connecting to the essence of the child. So what we see here is that in we'll call peak experiences, whether it's giving birth or under the chuppah or seeing one of your children being married or the birth of a grandchild or whatever it is, coming to Israel. So at peak experiences, the time expands, we'll put it that way. Now, what is prophecy? Prophecy is that a prophet is able to see the future and the present. And so because in a peak experience, our whole consciousness is expanded, so along with that, in a sense, the whole idea of time is expanded, and we can plug into the very essence of this child just being born or the event that is happening. So this is comparing all of the imahot had different levels of Ruach HaKodesh and different levels of prophecy. Now we have around 15 minutes left. I want to explore the comparisons of Rachel and Leah. In Kabbalah, Leah is called Alma de Ikasia, the hidden world, and Rachel is called Alma de Itgalia, the revealed world. Meaning that the sages and our great teachers, they saw, as we've discussed many times, especially going back to Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, all of those classes for those who were there, that the Torah is archetypal. So when we're talking about the Avot and the Imahot, we're not talking just about individual people who lived in one point of time. We're talking about archetypal energies that they represent. In fact, we say about the Avot that they are the Merkava. Hen a Merkava. They're the channel, they're the vehicle for certain energies in the world. So it's true with Rachel and Leah also. So they gave this name, the world of hiddenness, to Leah, and the world of the revealed world to Rachel. And they further compare that to the letters of God's name. The 4 letters of God's name are considered relatively, that the Yud and the Vav of God's 4-letter name are what we call the masculine energy, and the 2 Heys are feminine energy. And the first Hey is related to Leah, and it's called the world of hiddenness, because those first 2 letters, the Yud and the Hey, is a name of God itself, but it's hidden within the 4-letter name. And we know that Leah was very hidden, because really Yaakov's primary wife was Rachel, and she was, in a sense, always in the background. And we see it from the way that she's naming her children, how she related to that. She was like the hidden one. And Rachel, she was out with the sheep. She was out there. And so there's a verse in the Torah that when we came into Eretz Yisrael, we were told that we were to go to Har HaGrizim and Har Eval, and what's called the blessing and the curse would be pronounced, and the 6 tribes in one mountain, 6 tribes in the other. But before that, there's a verse that people were complaining, in a sense, that the whole concept of Kol Yisrael Aravim Zelazeh, all of Israel is responsible one for the other. And people were thinking, how can I be responsible for things that I don't know about other people or what they're doing? How can I be responsible for that? And so the verse says, Hanistarot Lashem Elokeinu, Haniglot Lanu Ulabanenu Ad Olam, that the hidden things are to God, and the revealed things are to us and our children. Meaning, those things that are hidden from us, that's God's realm. He'll take care of those things. We're not expected to take care of things that we don't know about. But those things that are revealed to us and our children, then we do have a responsibility. So this in a sense, is a deep understanding for an issue we can't really even delve into, is how come the Torah plays itself out with Yaakov marrying two sisters, which later became forbidden. This is hanistarot l'Hashem Elokeinu. This is like the hidden things are for God. And later, when it became forbidden for a man to marry sisters, then then there's a responsibility not to do that. So I'm mentioning this just because the whole relationship here is very mysterious. And it's even more mysterious that at a certain point, Rachel and Leah give their handmaidens to Yaakov also. So even though we usually talk about 4 imahot, really, in a sense, there were 6, because each one of the handmaidens gave birth to 2 of the tribes. They became an intrinsic part of Am Yisrael. Yeah, go on.
So there's an acronym for the names of Yaakov's 4 wives, and it spells out the word iron, barzel. So it's Bilhah, Rachel, Zilpah, and Leah. And barzel, iron, is the main component of the blood, the hemoglobin. And the transmission of Judaism comes through the mother, through this iron. And I'm wondering if there's some kind of way of magnetizing and attracting those souls that are really truly belonging to the Am Yisrael in this time of being able to teach Torah around the globe. We're living in unique times. That it used to be that a Jew who taught Torah would be burned at the stake. But here we are on Zoom.
Okay, so having established that there is a great mystery here of how this happened, and without going into it, it's the same kind of mystery as to why does the seed of Mashiach come through the relationship of Yehuda and Tamar, and then Lot and his daughters, and the somewhat, we'll call it risque meeting between Boaz and Ruth. So this is also on the level of Hanistarot L'Hashem Elokeinu. The hidden things are for Hashem. So we have with Rachel and Leah, they in a certain way they're opposites. One is very hidden, one is revealed, and yet the Gemara says they actually looked exactly alike, and their voices were exactly like. The only difference was in the eyes. And that's why the Torah specifically points out that the eyes of Leah were rachot, they were soft. They were, and Rashi explains, they were soft because she cried so much, thinking that she was going to be paired with Esav. And in fact, we can understand a little bit of why Rachel kept her silence, is that if Leah was married to Yaakov, she wouldn't have to be married to Esav. That's a possibility of why she was willing, in a sense, to perhaps sacrifice her unique relationship with Yaakov that took 7 years to develop. So here we see Rachel and Leah are very different, and yet we're told physically they were very similar. They were very similar. That's one of the reasons why Yaakov could not discern until the morning that it was Leah and not Rachel. Because everyone would ask, like, how did they pull that off? No matter how sniut Leah was. So here we have a partial answer, is that they really looked the same and they sounded the same. But on the other hand, they were very, very different. So I want to mention here something very, very interesting is the month that we're in. This whole series is about connecting the months and women. And even though we can't do it exactly, throughout the whole series, we've tried to match the women that we're going to be talking about with the time of year, at least, if not the month. So this month is Kislev. And it's brought down that if you divide the word Kislev by its syllables, it's Kes Lamed Vav. Kes means lechasot, to cover, hidden. And Lamed Vav is 36. So what's the connection to Kislev and Hanukkah? So we light 36 candles on Hanukkah. And when we first lit these candles, so we have the famous story that they had no pure oil. And they found one cruse of oil that was hidden away. They didn't know about it. It was hidden away and it was found. And they lit this and it lasted for 8 days. So Kislev is that the hidden light is of the 36 candles is revealed. So what's interesting, and this tells us about the relationship of Rachel and Leah. Rachel, again, is the more revealed one. Her beauty is revealed. Whereas Leah's was just as beautiful, but it was more hidden. So the interesting thing is that the numerical value of Leah equals 36. And every year during these parshas leading up to Hanukkah in Kislev, we read all about Leah. But it goes deeper than that, is another word with 36 is ohel, tent. So when the angels, Avram didn't know they were angels at that point, asked, where is your wife? He said, Hine ba'ohel. She is in the tent. So here we see a beautiful continuum that Sarah is the one in the tent, and it's Rivka who then comes into the tent of Sarah. And then Leah has her name is the same gematria as Ohel, and she's very, very hidden. So with the few minutes left, I wish we had more time, and I'll just mention, this is very deep, that it's brought down in Chassidut that Yaakov's connection with Leah was on a more subconscious, unconscious level, whereas his relationship to Rachel was on a more conscious level. In other words, we all have a conscious and subconscious, but the relationships were very much, Yaakov's relationship with Rachel was very open, was very revealed. And yet, he's buried with Leah. He's buried with Leah. So, and considering the way he ended up marrying Leah, you would think maybe he would never even talk to her. But he ended up having 6 of the tribes with Leah, and he's buried with Leah. So it's not a simple understanding of these relationships. But the last thing I want to mention is a very, very interesting one, that we're told that, along with their comparisons, that Yaakov's soulmate outside of Israel was Rachel. We know that as soon as they entered the land, Rachel passed away in childbirth. And then the rest of his life, so there were still the handmaidens, but there was Leah. But interesting enough, look at this paradox, is the numerical value of Eretz Yisrael is 832. The numerical value of Rachel's name is 238. So if you look at that carefully, 238 is the inverse number of 832. In mathematics, inverse numbers have meaning. And it's also brought down in Kabbalah and Chassidut that when this happens, there's a deep connection. So here we see that Rachel is very much connected to Eretz Yisrael. That's the song we sang at the beginning, for those who were here at the beginning. Vishavu banim ligvulam. She's buried in Beit Lechem because she's the beacon that will, and her crying will bring the children back to the borders. Yet when she crosses the borders, she passes away. So it means that she was in Chutz La'aretz. She was Yaakov's soulmate in Chutz La'aretz, but her inside of her inside is connected to Eretz Yisrael. And for all eternity, she's in Beit Lechem, and she's there until we're all of Am Yisrael comes back to the borders. I do want to mention, because I mentioned this idea of inverse numbers, another one, especially for women, which is good to know, is the numerical value for light is 207. The inverse of 207 is 702, which is Shabbat. And so this is a very, very beautiful kavana to have when women usher into the Shabbat for the whole family, because they light candles, they light the lights, and they bring Shabbos into the home. And so there's a very beautiful connection that light and Shabbos are inverse numbers. And I'll mention also, because this has to do with Hanukkah, and this is where we'll end, is that we said that Kislev will be good because it's about the months. So we're going to end with Kislev. Kislev, again, can be read Kes Lamed Vav, that the 36, the Lamed Vav, lights of Hanukkah, which were the oil which was hidden away, became revealed. And then we light the lights outside or by our windows to Persuming Nisa, to advertise, to reveal the light. And so we're told that another phrase that has the same gematria as light, or is Ein Sof, is infinity. And so what we see in the lights of Hanukkah, we're told that the light of the first day of creation was hidden away. And it's asked, well, where was it hidden? So we're told it's hidden in the Torah, that when we learn Torah, we are contacting, we're absorbing this original spiritual hidden light of creation. In Shabbat, that the physical candles that we light before Shabbat, and again, when the women make this motion, it's like bringing infinite light into finite light. The infinite aspect of Shabbat, that's what we say, Shabbat is 1/60th of the world to come. It has an aspect of infinity. So we're also told that these lights, the light of the first day of creation, can be seen in the menorah in the temple and the Chanukiah that we all light. And we're told, how long did that light shine for Adam before it was hidden away? 36 hours. So that's the Kes Lev, Kes Lamed Vav, that the Hanukkah, the 36 candles of Hanukkah are revealing the 36 hours, the aspect of the hidden light, the Or Haganuz. So I'll end with a blessing that, because actually, I didn't look in the calendar, but the next Rosh Chodesh is actually during Hanukkah. I'm not sure exactly when we're meeting, but just want to bless everyone that as we get closer to Hanukkah, that the lights, our inner lights, become stronger and stronger, and that we have the strength to bring them out into the world, and that Am Yisrael has the koach to reveal its mission to the world to be a light unto the nations.
Amen.
Okay, so
Amen.
now, as we always do, anyone who wants to unmute and have a comment, a question, whatever moves anyone.
Thank you very
Just
much.
do it one at a time. Anyone with a comment, a question?
I've got just a comment. When you say the hashgacha pratis about a name before the baby, before you give the name to the baby, my son had the name for his daughter. We're going to call her Bala Malka, but when he got called up, all of a sudden his mouth said Bala Miriam, and no, it was this lady who Miriam is somebody, is my auntie who no one ever named after, no one had thought about it, but it just came out just like that.
Wow. You know, since you said that, I'll tell you in short an amazing story about hashgacha pratit and naming babies. Is Baruch Hashem, for all of my children and grandchildren, I came up with a song. And if anyone has any of my CDs, they're in there. Usually in the booklet, I recognize it. I write it. So when we had a grandson born in New York, and 4.5 years ago. So immediately, sometimes the song comes before when my daughter or daughter-in-law is pregnant, and sometimes it comes after. This song came between the birth and the brit. I came up with a song, and the words, and I put it to words, and it's from the Rosh Chodesh davening, Ahavat Olam Tavi Lahem, Ubrit Avot Labanim Tiskor. An everlasting love you brought to them, and the covenant between fathers and children you will remember. We're talking to God here. So I came up with the song and the words. At the Brit, so they named their son Olam. And I had just made up a song saying Ahavat Olam. It was like, and the amazing thing is they named the baby, and then afterwards I sang the song, and it didn't click in my head. I started singing the song, and my wife says, oh my gosh, you made up this song with Olam's name in it before he was even named. It was like, whoa. So that's just like, that's our personal hashgacha pratit story with naming children.
Rabbi Trugman?
Yes.
Rabbi Trugman, why is we don't see anywhere that Rivka is buried when she dies? Like, why does it only talk about Devorah, her handmaiden dying, but we never see Rivka dying in terms of that she
So I'm
died?
going to let Rachel answer this.
According to the Midrash, she died at the age of 121. It's not written anywhere in the text, but the oral tradition retained this concept that she requested from the local Chevra Kadisha to bury her at night so that she would not draw attention to that, and that she would not be noticed and to be remembered as the mother of Esau, because the only one who was around at the time of her death that could accompany her to the grave was Esau. Yitzchak was already too elderly and blind and was not able to be part of the Levaya. Yaakov was still away with Lavan. And so the only one left was Esau, and she did not want to be associated with him. She felt like culpable, as my husband mentioned, that because of her lineage, she felt that his going off the derech, and not just going off the derech, but a rapist, a murderer. He murdered Nimrod to steal the garment. He raped an engaged woman. That was all in the same day that he sold his birthright. And that was the day that he was mourning for Avram. Why did Avram die on that day? Because he didn't want to see his grandchild going out to the Tarbut Ra'ada, to get the going down off the derech. And so he was the only one left to accompany her, was Esav. And she didn't want to draw attention that she was the mother of Esav. She wanted to go back into that resort, into that inner place of that Pintel Yid that enabled her to be proactive about drawing the blessing down to Yaakov and not to Esav. And so she separated herself from that and asked to be buried at night in secret, in quiet. Stille Heit, as we say in Yiddish.
Okay, anyone else? Going once, going twice?
I was just wondering why Rivka never sent for Yaakov to come back.
She did. That was the problem. She sent her handmaiden, Devorah Hamineket. She sent Devorah, but she died along the way. Devorah was already much more older than Rivka.
Yes,
and she died along the way. She never made it to tell Yaakov. This is before text messages.
Well, I don't know how she could be 121 because Yaakov had Yosef when he was 91. And he left 6 years later, so it was 97. And if she was 20 when he was born, she would be 117. And so if she lived
23, she was 23.
She was 23?
Rivka.
How do we know she's 23?
Because they prayed. First, they prayed for
After
the first 10 years until she was bat mitzvah age. Then they prayed another 10 years till she was 23. This is all in the Midrash. It's not in the text, that's why you have to read between the lines and the oral tradition.
How can we believe that she was 3 years old when she fell off the camel? I mean, how can we believe something like that?
Right.
You're not the first person to ask that. There are many discussions based on the Rashi. Because Rashi takes that line, the idea that she was 3 years old. I don't want to fake an answer here, but I'm just to say this in general. Many people have the feeling that whatever Rashi says, that's what it is. But if you look at Ramban, the Ramban argues with Rashi all the time. That Ibn Ezra argues with Rashi all the time. So there are different opinions regarding this idea that she was 3 years old. We're using, and Rashi didn't make it up, he was basing it on other traditions, but this is just a general statement that many times in Rashi or in the Gemara, that someone will quote something and like very one-dimensionally. In fact, if I really think about it, I started with this idea that we have a clear statement from Chazal that a tzaddik ben tzaddik will be answered before a tzaddik ben rasha. That a righteous person, the child of a righteous person, will be answered before a righteous person, the child of a not so righteous person. And that's true. But then, like I introduced, we have a completely opposite idea. And we see that on one hand, Yitzhak was the one who was answered, but we see later in the story, it's Rivka who's being answered in the sense. So anytime you go deep into learning, there are many different perspectives. My wife introduced according to Rashi and the Midrash, but
Rashi waited. It says that he waited until she was 13.
I know, but so the question
to consummate the relationship.
Yeah. In other words, I have to say, even though it's very hard to understand a 3-year-old girl out watching the sheep, but we have to
Get her in the
say
water. She wasn't
that
running.
until about, I don't know, I'm just guessing here, about 100 years ago, it was still very, very, very common. In fact, it was probably the rule that parents would make shidduchim when their kids were 3, 4, 5 years old. Doesn't mean they got married. And it's the same thing with Yitzhak and Rivka. It doesn't mean that he married a 3-year-old. But what it does mean is that there was a shidduch that was made. That's one way to understand it. This, if really until 100 years ago, that's how it was done in many communities, not all communities, of course, but in many Hasidic communities, which was almost a rule in Europe, where shidduchim were made, even when the boy was 4 years old and the girl was 2 years old, and the parents already said, this one's going to marry this one. That's how it was.
Not only Hasidic, I know in Morocco also they did it. They did it in many places.
Yeah.
They did it in Yemen to protect the little girls because their Arab neighbors would just come and steal the girls.
Correct.
If they weren't officially married.
Exactly.
And so I met a woman who was 88 years old, and she said she had been married since she was 8 years old. We live in an area that has a lot of Yemenites in this part of the country. And I met this woman, and she said that she cried because she didn't know how she was supposed to have a baby. She was like Rivka, but she was married from the age of 8 to save her from being kidnapped by the Arab neighbors.
Right. I have another question. I know you addressed it, but I, for whatever reason, did not pay attention.
Okay.
Why didn't Rivka speak to Esav about the brachot and giving them to Yitzchak, to Yaakov? And then my next question is, how many hours a day do you guys learn together?
We'll go. Please explain the first part again. The question
you
that
mentioned.
Can we see?
She didn't talk to Esav. Who is speaking?
No, Rachel, you mentioned that you addressed the point.
So there's two questions here then. Why didn't she speak to her husband about it?
Exactly, yes, that's what I mean.
Soulmates, and why didn't she rebuke her son, who was also going out and being such a troublemaker? Part of it was because of her inner deep respect for her husband, Yitzchak. Yitzchak, according to Hasidus, never wanted to see anything bad about Esav. He would overlook any of his mistakes because he was always hoping that he would do tshuva. He always believed in him. He always gave him love. He always gave him the benefit of the doubt. So that's on one side, on Yitzchak's side. And Rivka had ultimate respect for that, for her husband. And she didn't want to upset him either. That was one of the strategies that she took. But the other thing she also felt this inner sense of guilt. She said, it's my fault that Esav is acting out in such a negative way. It's because of my heritage, because of my genetic code. So she felt humiliated by that and ashamed. And so the only way that she could do this was like the kislev, in the hidden way, in a very hidden way. Even though she was entirely proactive, she did it with subtlety.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
I don't know, maybe you addressed it, but I just didn't get it. When you were talking about soulmates and the fact that love at first sight, it's Shirley Rendell, by the way. Anyway, love at first sight, then you mentioned that Rivka.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Love at first sight.
Could you start again? I was trying to do something
You're trying
here.
to see the whole screen.
Yeah. Okay, sorry. Start again, please.
Okay, anyway, so basically you were talking about soulmates and love at first sight, and you mentioned that Rivka loved Yitzchak at first sight and she fell off the camel, whatever. But Yitzchak, it says that he brought her into the tent and then he loved her. So it's not love at first sight. It was only one.
It was
she towards him.
Right. That's a very good observation.
She saw him.
Yeah.
She saw him. At that moment, she saw right into his soul. She said, this is my soulmate. This man who knows about one God and is praying at the top of this mountain in this place at this time. The first mincha, that's my soulmate. She saw him. It wasn't necessarily mutual.
You're right. You know, that was a very good observation because it was from Rivka's side. And the same thing with Yaakov and Rachel. It doesn't say that Rachel immediately falls in love with Yaakov, but it does say how much Yaakov, like I say, he kisses her, he cries. And then it says that the 7 years went by like nothing because of his great love for her. But we don't, you're right, we don't actually see in the text that Rachel fell in love with him immediately. It was the same thing with David and Bathsheba. It was David who saw Bathsheba and go on.
I just thought of another connection. What did Rivka do when she saw Yitzchak, V'yetzes Yitzchak v'titkas? There's the root of Kislev. And she covered her face.
Right, okay, yeah.
Kislev. She went into that hidden place.
Right.
Nice. Oh,
very good.
We don't know how old Rachel was when Yaakov saw her. I mean, he was almost 80 years old.
Right.
But, you know, they wouldn't let a
77, 77 to be exact.
Right. So he was 77, right.
Yeah.
And so, but Rachel was, and they wouldn't let a girl in like 15 or 16 or something like that go down to the well by herself with those other shepherds who would steal water unless you put a rock over it. So she must have been very young. So he would say he would have to wait at least 7 years to marry her. Maybe she was 6 or 7. I don't know how old she was.
That's a very good question. I don't know. I don't think I've ever seen an explanation. You'll see there are a number of Rashis, very, very, very long Rashis in Sefer Bereshit, where he goes through a person's whole lineage and how old they were, and to establish how old they were at a certain point. But as far as Rachel goes, I don't remember a midrash or a Gemara or anything that tells us how old she was. So that's a very good question.
And actually, a lot of people say that, Lavan made him wait 7 years, but he's the one who said 7 years, not Lavan.
Right.
Lavan says, what do you want? And he could have come up with 5 years. He could have come up with 3 years. He chose 7 years.
Right.
So why did he want to wait so long? Why did he make that 7 years?
Excellent.
Your questions are better than our answers.
The questions I always have.
We all have our homework to do.